You're listening to the October 23rd, 2015 edition of the Cybercrime and Business Podcast, the weekly podcast that's focused exclusively on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. On today's episode, we have an interview with Loucif Kharouni. He's the senior threat researcher at Damballa. Zerodium, which describes itself as the premium zero-day vulnerability and exploit acquisition program, is offering a $1 million bounty for an iOS 9 zero-day. And we chat with Kharouni about the zero-day market, bug bounties, and then get into a bit about what's going on the dark web. This podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. That interview with Loucif Kharouni will be coming up in a little bit. But as always, first we're going to dive right into it and recap the top trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions that you might have missed over the past week. So I'll throw it over to you, Matt.
Yeah, this week Surfwatch Labs collected data on 138 industry targets negatively associated with cybercrime, and another 307 being discussed on the dark web, so that's actually quite a bump from last week. From that information, we get our top trending industry targets, and I'll run through those real quick. Coming in at number 3 this week, we have Scan Computers International. The UK online reseller confirmed an attack that's taking place against several other UK e-tailers. Cybercriminals are using DDoS attacks to extort companies like Scan Computers International out of money. Ilan Raja of Scan Computer International said the company received an email containing a ransom demand to stop a future DDoS attack from happening. Other companies in the UK reported receiving ransom demands of 16.66 Bitcoin, or about $4,000 US. Coming in at number 2 this week, we have John Brennan. CIA Director John Brennan initially made headlines this week after a teenage hacker claimed to have hacked his AOL email address. Yesterday, kind of adding validity to the claims by the teenager, WikiLeaks posted those emails on their website. The emails were all before 2009, and no classified information has been found in any of Brennan's emails. However, the emails did contain social security numbers, passport numbers, and addresses of his family and associates. A list of those emails and documents can be found on wikileaks.com. And coming in at number 1, we have Electronic Arts, or EA, for gamers out there. With EA, Madden Football, you guys know all that. Some customers of EA had their account information posted on Pastebin by an anonymous source. Customer email addresses, account passwords, and game lists were all posted to the website. EA said in a statement that they would monitor the accounts of customers who are on that list, but they also said in a statement that they didn't believe the information was compromised as a result of a data breach of their networks. And what happened there was a gamer that was actually informed by another anonymous source. It's some guy that goes around and actually informs people they've been hacked. He goes with a handle urhack.com. And he informed this gamer that, I got your information from this Pastebin post, and guy checked it out, and it was pretty legit. So we'll probably hear more about that in the future.
That first story you said, Matt, about the UK reseller DDoS attack, one interesting aspect is that the companies were basically hit by DDoS and then extorted for Bitcoin. And what's interesting is the companies kind of flipped it back on the attackers, and now they're offering a reward for any information that leads to successful prosecution against the culprits. And I guess one of these same websites was hit back in 2013, and they successfully did that, and it led to arrest and someone getting prosecuted. And now this website's doing it again. And there's just a few companies doing that. So I thought that was kind of neat. It's like these companies are getting extorted, and they're flipping it back right on the attackers and offering up a bounty for them instead.
Yeah, I hope that works, because when I was reading that's what's the word I want to use? It's kind of shady. I mean, pay this money, we're going to set, I don't know. To me, everything that these companies have to go through worrying about cybersecurity, and then they have to, just some yahoos out there like, oh, if you don't pay me this money, that's a lot of money. I hope they do get caught. Getting into today's first discussion topic, we had another leak of government documents, some information out there. Some of this information we're going to talk about is in my opinion, when I was reading through this, is pretty shocking. However, this didn't come from Edward Snowden. Jeff, you want to get us started off on that?
Well, it came from the same group, Glenn Greenwald. Him and another person, I forget the other person's name, but they founded The Intercept, kind of to deal with all that, the leaked Edward Snowden documents. But basically, there's another leak. Some people are calling him Snowden 2.0. I was reading one article about it, kind of summed it up nicely. It was Benjamin Wallace Wells at New York Mag. He said that, in essence, there's two newsmaking items from this. The first is that Glenn Greenwald, Jeremy Shahill, and others have a major source who is not Edward Snowden. And the second, more consequential news, is that for every intended or unauthorized target the United States kills in a distant drone strike, it also kills about 6 other people who are not intended. So that's pretty important news.
Some of the documents, when I'm looking through this, one of the things that highlights was this Operation Haymaker, and this data shows that between January 2012 and February 2013, U.S. Special Operations airstrike killed more than 200 people. Unfortunately, and it's not even funny really, of those, only 35 were the intended targets. So, with drones, obviously, one of the big things that why we promote them is that it saves our military people from being in harm's way. But that is a pretty grotesque, I'm going to say, murder ratio. I mean, we're targeting someone and we're killing nearly 90% of the people killed in airstrikes were not the intended targets. I mean, that's horrible. I would see why you wouldn't want that leaked.
Well, yeah, not to get too political, but that's always been one of the things that I've always, I'd say, disagreed with Obama the most on. But I'll try not to go down that whole political road. One of the interesting things is, it's probably just a couple weeks ago, I saw Citizen 4, which is the documentary, I think it won an Academy Award, the documentary on Edward Snowden. Have you seen that, Matt?
I saw clips of it. I haven't actually watched. No, I haven't watched the whole thing.
Well, it's pretty good. If you get a chance to watch it, it kind of follows Edward Snowden kind of post-leak, and he's talking with Glenn Greenwald and all the different reporters, and kind of hiding from the U.S. and Hong Kong and different places. But at the end of that documentary, Glenn Greenwald and Edward Snowden meet up, and they tease this new source, which apparently, it sounds to me at least like it's this source, because the movie sort of ends where they draw this chain going all the way up to the President of the United States, and they just kind of leave it hanging there. So apparently this is the new source that's come out and leaked all these documents. Snowden actually wrote about the leak. He said, "When we look back on today, we will find the most important national security story of the year." Which could be true, but it doesn't seem like there's been a lot. I mean, there has been a good amount of coverage, but it doesn't seem like there's been as much coverage of this as I expected there would be. I don't know if you noticed that this week. Have you seen a lot of people writing about this week, Matt?
And this is coming from a guy who essentially lives in the news, and I have not, actually. This is one of the first things I've seen about this.
Just to get into the source, there's not really a whole lot about the leak or the breach or how it happened, but The Intercept, they just said that they obtained a secret cache of slides from this source, and it details the inner workings of the U.S. military's drone operations from 2011 till 2013. The source says about these drones, this outrageous explosion of watch listing, of monitoring people and racking and stacking them on lists, assigning them numbers, assigning them death sentences without notice on a worldwide battlefield, it was from the very first instance wrong. So it's kind of, similar stuff to what Edward Snowden was saying. And it does seem like a pretty big story, but we haven't learned too much about how the actual breach happened. Obviously, he was able to take this information, and so far he remains anonymous, so I'm kind of curious to see if where he stole it from has any way to sort of figure out who took it and track him down and, try to prosecute him like they're doing with Snowden.
I think it'll be interesting to see. I'll find it hard to believe we never find out who the identity of this guy is. And I wonder, apparently he's willing to go through essentially what Edward Snowden has. Edward Snowden will probably never be able to step back in the United States for turning over some of this information. We'll have to see if it gets to that. But I'm on the side of kudos to people who it's a fine line, Jeff. Kudos to people that think they're doing the right thing. But on the other hand, I don't know. I mean, you're kind of not supposed to do this stuff, really. It is an act of treason, I would imagine, according to the United States. And we'll have to see how it goes.
I don't know. It kind of seems strange to me. You just got a couple of people in government who basically can decide who lives or dies, and there's not really any oversight over it.
Right.
This is kind of creepy to me.
Well, so after that, that's depressing. Honestly, I mean, we'll go on with the podcast here, but that kind of put a damper on my day.
Sorry, everybody out there listening.
Sorry. Moving on to advisories. As always, Surfwatch Labs collects data on a variety of cyber advisories. Some of the ones that we saw this week, first we're going to start off with this FinFisher spyware advisory. A report from researchers at Citizen Lab identified, quote, 33 likely government users of FinFisher in 32 countries, end quote. Of the 32 countries, 16 were new spots for the spyware. These countries included Angola, Egypt, Gabon, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Lebanon, Morocco, Oman, Paraguay, Saudi Arabia, Slovenia, Spain, Taiwan, Turkey, and Venezuela. Just for people that don't know what FinFisher was, it's described as a sophisticated intrusion software that was developed by FinFisher Gamma Group and was sold exclusively to government agencies for intelligence gathering and law enforcement purposes.
Yeah, we also saw another Android advisory. There's new Android advisories every week. This time, LTE vulnerabilities are leaving Android devices at risk of DDoS attacks. Several vulnerabilities were found in the long-term evolution networks that could potentially leave Android devices at risk of those attacks. The vulnerability was found by the Computer Emergency Response Team Coordination Center at Carnegie Mellon University.
Yeah, and then our last advisory that we found this week was a malvertising campaign that is targeting Portuguese-speaking users. Researchers at Symantec have discovered a malvertising campaign that is targeting Portuguese speakers. The majority of Portuguese speakers targeted by the campaign are located in Brazil, and Brazilians are accounting for about 75% of all the victims of this campaign. Users visiting any of several thousand ad-supported websites, including MSN, Universal Online, and global Portuguese-speaking websites, are at risk of this malvertising campaign.
Yeah, and then Surfwatch Labs also put out some alerts this week. One of those alerts related to Anonymous. We talk about Anonymous all the time on this podcast, just because they're such a broad collective. Everyone can just say they're anonymous. But there's a new campaign called Op Gorilla that's targeting Belgian government websites through DDoS attacks. The campaign began on October 10th when a few different websites were confirmed to be down for a period of time, including the official website of the Prime Minister and the Brussels Parliament website. Well, the attacks didn't last very long. The hacktivist groups took credit for them on Twitter. But this is just one of the many operations that are put out by Anonymous and Surfwatch Labs. I think you helped work on this, Matt. You put out, basically for our customers, a collection of all the recent Anonymous attacks. There was quite a few of them, wasn't there? There must have been at least 20. I mean, there was probably hundreds total, but probably like 20, I think, that we highlighted or so.
Yeah, 20 more prominent ones that everyone's kind of heard of. Yeah, when we went to the data, there were hundreds, but I'm not going to over half of them I'd never heard of before. So, but the 20 most prominent ones, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like anytime anyone gets upset, they're like, let's launch a hacktivist campaign. Give it a hashtag. Right. But it was pretty interesting, though, because we put out that to our customers and we put out the alert. And then I believe it was just the next day or maybe the same day, there was this interview on the National Post. I think the title is The Face of Operation Anon Down. And this operation's in protest to a fatal RCMP shooting of an anonymous protester in British Columbia. So there's just been a lot, I guess, going on the anonymous front. And that's actually, if you guys get a chance and you want to get more, I guess, but my point is if you want to get more behind the scenes for why Anonymous does a lot of things that they do, you can go ahead and read this interview. It's on the National Post. It's called The Face of Operation Anon Down. And, it's pretty interesting to me, but reading it, it's still kind of frustrating me because I guess my problem with hacktivists is obviously they're trying to protest the shooting, but he's still talking about how even though there's a lot of maybe good, I guess that from their point of view, at least good, he said, in some sense, everything we're doing is for the lulz. And that's always been my problem with hacktivists. It's like, they always say they're doing it for the cause, but really they're just doing it because they want to and they think it's funny or, they kind of get off on it. But
yeah, they're trying to show off or, make a name for themselves and I do agree with you on that. Now, what we're about to talk about next, wasn't it? I mean, I guess you could say it's an advisory. It could be down the road, but it has to do with ISIS. And this involves a story that ran on CNN Money. And the title of this article was ISIS is attacking the U.S. energy grid, which, is kind of scary. But then in parentheses, they put and failing. And this, the article essentially, kind of highlighted that, yes, ISIS is trying to attack our energy grids, but they just right now do not have the capability for it. Investigators refuse to reveal details or cite specific incidents, but Caitlin Durkovic, who's the Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Protection at the Department of Homeland Security, did say that ISIL is beginning to perpetrate cyber attacks, which we kind of know. I mean, Jeff and I have kind of pointed this out before, that ISIS they're trying to make their presence felt online through web defacements and stuff, attacking like energy grids and stuff. That probably would be a step up for their capabilities at this point. The FBI did, like I said, they pointed out that their capabilities are pretty low for now, but the FBI is worried that the Islamic State or its supporters will buy malicious software that can sneak into computers and destroy electronics. An attack on power companies could disrupt the flow of energy of U.S. homes and businesses, of course. And I mean, I could see that being the natural progression of their attacks. I don't know how concerning that really is, though, Jeff.
I interviewed Mark Gazit. He's the CEO of Thedere, which is based in Israel. I interviewed him a couple of times, and I'm pretty sure he was on the podcast when he was talking about, I think it was probably the beginning of the year, end of last year, we were kind of doing 2015 predictions, and I'm pretty sure that was one of his. He was kind of talking about the rise of these either second tier, or whatever you want to call them, nation states, or these groups that might be willing to do some attack like this. Because typically everyone attributes this kind of critical infrastructure attacks to nation states. And obviously China's not just going to start a war, start some big thing. So it's kind of been like, yes, everyone does espionage, but they're not going to actually do anything because they don't want to mess with us, But obviously someone like ISIS or some other hacking group or some lone wolf hacker who doesn't really have those concerns could do that. So I've heard that expressed a lot. And I think a couple weeks ago on the podcast, we talked about, there was that nuclear report that was released, basically saying that the cybersecurity at these nuclear sites are woefully inadequate. And not to go back over that too much, but one of the quotes from the lead author on the study, Carolyn Balin, she's a research associate at Chatham House. She said basically kind of the same thing that the FBI and all these people we're interviewing are saying. She said, for me, the really scary scenario is when a well-financed terrorist group like ISIS meets a hacker for hire company like the kind seen in Russia that may be extremely sophisticated and not have a lot of ethics.
Speaking of having something potentially happen, to me, this is one of the most important newsworthy stories I saw all week, and it has to do with SCADA exploits. Now, we've talked about criminals out there spending quite a bit of money on 0 days. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff. I've actually heard of government spending like upwards of like $1 million for. The interview coming up. I just did this interview earlier today. We're going to put it on the podcast. What we talk about in there is there's this company that's offering $1 million bounty. I think it's the largest ever, publicly known bounty for anyone who can give them a iOS 9 0 day. So yeah, some people spend quite a bit. So when we're talking about SCADA, so what SCADA stands for is Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. It's the industrial automation control system at the core of many modern industries. So we're talking energy, manufacturing, oil, and gas. And this article that was put on Forbes by Thomas Fox Brewster kind of highlighted how you can purchase 0-day exploit packs for very, very cheap, considering. As a matter of fact, Fox Brewster he had been speaking with Yuri Gherkin, hope I said that right, who heads up GLEG, which is a small company based in Dubna, Russia. And this company collects, researches, and resells SCADA 0 days. There's this one, it's called the SCADA Plus Exploit Pack. And what it does, it collects all publicly available SCADA vulnerabilities and its own 0 days into one place. Users pay just $8,100 to get all of that for an entire year, on top of a Canvas license believed to cost just over $3,000 for up to 10 users. The claim is that new 0 days are added every month. Now think about that, Jeff. Now we're talking, and like you said, you're going to talk about some of this a little later in the interview. This is important. That SCADA, like I said, exactly what it is. It helps. It's the backbone of like all of these major industries. Essentially, you can have all this information about vulnerabilities on it for if I do simple math here, $11,000.
Yeah, and well, part of the reason it's so much cheaper than something like an iOS or an Apple vulnerability is because everyone's got an iPhone, but SCADA is much more limited, and even if you have a vulnerability, it's still tricky to actually go about implementing it and using it. So just from a market perspective, it makes sense that it would be much cheaper. Not to say that's not something to be concerned about, but it kind of makes sense, at least in my head. I guess we can move on to some of the legal stuff that happened this week. One of the ones that was interesting to me is Amazon got sued. There's always been this stuff with fake reviews on Amazon. This is kind of funny to me because I used to do work on Elance and other sites, and you can basically get paid. Someone would be like, "Hey, I'll pay you $10 to write a review about these boots that you've never worn." So sometimes you go on Amazon and you're going to buy a pair of boots. You get these 5-star reviews about how these boots changed somebody's life, and obviously it's just somebody trying to boost the score or whatever. So Amazon's trying to fight back against that. They filed a lawsuit against more than 1,000 people for posting these fake reviews on their website. Amazon's argument is that the people in this case violated their review policy that prohibits paid for or fictional reviews. Amazon's decision to file this lawsuit comes at 6 months after the company targeted several other websites offering cash for review services. So it's something they've been, trying to fight against for a while because they know it's a problem on their site.
So pretty much when you're looking up an item and you see like all these high reviews, a lot of them aren't actually accurate. It could be just people posting. Well,
I know it's a big problem if you follow like the indie author scene, which I'm sure everybody does. But a lot of like these self-published authors, they almost, in the past at least, there's definitely a temptation to pay to get some reviews because, reviews really help sell books, and most self-published authors don't hardly sell anything. So there's definitely a temptation to want to do something like this to sort of gin up some action, on your book. So, I can see why people do it, but apparently, I think it's a good thing that they're fighting back because it used to be kind of a case where it's like, well, everyone else is doing it. It's almost like I have to do it too. And there's sites like Fiverr, for example. And if you ever heard of that, basically for $5 you can get people to do stuff. So you can go on Fiverr and get people to write a review and stuff. I wouldn't recommend doing that now because Amazon's suing people. But
well, it'd be worth that $5 maybe. I don't know. Moving on to more legal news, we have another more mess, is what I'll call it, from the Silk Road situation that went down. We have another DEA agent that's going to be serving prison time as a result of the Silk Road takedown. DEA agent Carl Force was sentenced to 78 months in prison for his role in the Silk Road investigation. Force attempted to extort money from Ross Ulbricht, who was convicted of being Silk Road boss Dread Pyre Roberts and is currently facing a life sentence. Force also stole money from a customer of Coin MKT, a company he was, quote, moonlighting for. The customer had $370,000 stolen by Force. Force put $37,000 of that money into a government account to make it look like he was doing his job, essentially, but then kept the rest of the money for himself. So he'll be going to prison for about 6 years, a little more, 6.5 years.
Yeah, that Silk Road story's been around for a while, and same as the Sony story. Sony was back in the news again. They settled with employees over their data breach. Sony agreed to pay between $5.5 to $8 million as a result of that breach. Of the money, about $2 million will be put into a cash fund to reimburse class members. The lawyers in this case will receive around $3.5 million, so pretty good payday for them.
Yeah, no kidding.
And then Sony will also provide ID theft protection to those employees that were affected by the breach.
And that's probably not the biggest point of that whole story. I mean, it's kind of starting to put an end on it, but $5.5 million to $8 million, yeah, that's a lot of money to me and you, but to them, that probably wasn't the biggest damage that was caused by the breach by a long shot, to be honest with you. And then our last legal bit here, former civilian naval engineer Mostafa Ahmed Awad was sentenced to 11 years in prison for attempted espionage. Awad passed military technology secrets to an FBI undercover agent that was posing as an Egyptian intelligence officer. Information Awad attempted to leak included 4, quote, computer-aided drawings of a U.S. nuclear aircraft carrier. Nice guy. Good for him. Good job.
At least they didn't catch Snowden and they didn't catch this new guy, but at least they're catching some people.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, did you get a chance to find anything interesting this week for our Funny Story of the Week segment?
I did, actually. And so for those of you that for those of you who turned up, for those of you who tuned in last week, you might remember we ran down a list of what we deemed, or maybe just myself deemed, unusual internet-connected or IoT devices. Jeff sounded like he was actually kind of into a couple of them. With that segment last week, we focused on the hilarity of the device, and we didn't really talk about the potential security risks of those IoT devices. Now, fast forward to this week, we have a Wi-Fi-enabled electric kettle that made news for the vulnerability. So we're talking about a kettle, like a kettle pot, like you boil water in it. Security researchers at Penn Test Partners found a security vulnerability in the iKettle Wi-Fi electric kettle. The vulnerability allows a hacker to crack the password of the Wi-Fi network the device is connected to. To summarize the vulnerability, I'm just going to quote the article from Softpedia where I read this from. Attackers could easily use a directional antenna aimed at a house where an iKettle is used, force the kettle into dropping its current Wi-Fi network and spoofing the original network's SID, and fool the iKettle into connecting to the attacker's network using the password for the original Wi-Fi network. So the researchers behind this, they actually took this a step further. They actually drove around London, where they're located, and they were just cracking Wi-Fi networks where households were using this iKettle, which, by the way, I've never even heard of this before, but apparently maybe in London it's a big thing. With this, they actually created a map of insecure Wi-Fi networks around the city of London. They obviously did disclose that information. But why did this happen, Jeff? All because you couldn't wait until you either got home or simply entered the kitchen to start boiling your water. You really need an app that you push that says, okay, kettle, boil water for me. I don't get that.
That'll do it for this week's discussion. Coming up now, we have our interview with Loucif Kharouni, the senior threat researcher at Damballa. And we talk about the zero-day market and some of these bug bounties, and as well as some of the exploits and things that he found doing some research on the dark web. Yeah, I guess to get started, I've been reading a lot about the dark web and 0 days over the last few weeks, and I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about those topics. So to start with, one of the bigger stories recently is Zerodium. They're offering $1 million for an iOS 9 0-day. It's the biggest bounty ever publicly offered for a single exploit. Just wondering if that surprises you to see such a huge payout for one potential vulnerability.
Yes, of course. It's a big amount of money for an exploit or a jailbreak for the iOS 9. But I think it was also a way to create a buzz around the company and probably create some challenge for those researchers who are looking for exploits and bugs in softwares. But when you look at this announcement a little bit closer, you can see on their website that they have some requirements about under which conditions they are going to pay that bounty. And I think recently somebody came up with a jailbreak for the iOS 9, but he didn't get the bounty because he didn't meet all the requirements for that. So basically what they're looking for is for a way to jailbreak or, get access remotely to a iOS 9 or an iPhone or whatever Apple's product remotely without having physical access to the device. And they want the exploit to be browser-based or message-based. So to meet all these criteria, it's very difficult. On the other hand, at the end of that announcement on the webpage, they also mentioned that if the exploit or the jailbreak doesn't meet all the requirements, they are also willing to consider to buy something that you can come up with for a different price, because they know they're putting the bar very high.
Yeah.
They're trying really to change the way people think about exploits and the whole entire business model, actually, because for the longest time, 0 days were always linked to criminals, right? And then you had those, let's say, white hat who found bugs into different softwares and were reporting that to the company and would get a bounty for that, or sometimes nothing. So what they're basically trying to say is they're trying to attract all of these guys to be the first people to hold and have exploits available so that they can resell that to their customers. So they're trying to shift the entire business to them and have those researchers, instead of going to the companies and have a patch to fix the issue, they will instead get those exploits and, sell that to the customers. So what they're basically saying that, if, I don't know, for example, if Adobe is giving you $5,000 for this exploit or for this bug that you found, we'll give you 3 times what they give you.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. I wanted to get your thoughts on that business model, because this company's, been getting a lot of criticism for it, but Apple, like, for example, to my knowledge, I don't think they pay anyone for finding bugs. I think they only give a credit to the security researcher. And so it seems to me that they're basically filling kind of a natural gap in the market. Their founder basically said that he was defending the ethics of the business, and he said that expecting security researchers to turn over their work to billion-dollar companies like Apple or Google for free or for just a few $1,000 isn't really moral either.
Yeah, it's probably true in some ways, but I think it depends on where you want to sit after that and how do you morally want to do your work. And I can agree that if a multi-billion company have people reporting bugs that are valid and that are critical, they should be compensated for that, of course. But then if you have now some kind of competitor who's coming and say, no, sell that to me and I give you twice as much or even more, then it's a hard business to compete, So either everybody's going to increase the prices of the bounties to be the first one to get it, or some companies will say, this is our pricing. It's up to you now.
Do you think it'll be that we'll see more of this in the future? We'll see more companies kind of trying to sort of be the middleman for these exploits?
Well, for now, the business is pretty closed because, again, it's a sensitive topic in every aspect. What I see is more people trying to find those exploits or bugs and, reporting them and selling those to the best buyer or bidder. For instance, if you have Zerodium, giving you 40,000 for an exploit, you probably want to sell that to them. And we're seeing also another trend at the same time that's happening is we even see some claiming to be researchers to find security issues into, some company network and asking for a fee. There's also this trend now, which is gonna a little bit similar to what's happening with the exploits, but at another level. So it's not I'm finding a bug in your product, but I'm finding a bug in your network. So please give me some money. And we saw that some people would do it and would share the information, but some people would ask for money, and if not, trying to blackmail and do some extortion on those companies as well. So this is a little bit almost the same mindset where I find a bug in your product, pay me, otherwise I just go to see someone else and get more money.
Yeah, and a lot of these exploits, sometimes they get traded and sold on the dark web. And I know you wrote a post recently about some stuff that Damballa had found on some of these underground forums that you guys monitor. Just wondering, when I think of the dark web, a lot of times we see a lot of like payment card kind of stuff on there. I'm wondering if that's typically what you see the most of, or if there's anything maybe that surprised you in that research.
The dark web is very interesting because it's almost like whatever you can think of, you can find it. Even like very strange things you wouldn't probably not think you would find there. But again, you have a little bit the same concept as the regular web, where you have criminal forums, you have online shops where they would sell stuff they would not sell on the regular web, like drugs, some weapons, or things like that. But you also find the regular, criminality, where cyber criminality, where they sell, exploits, they sell toolkits, they sell malware. So the difference also between an exploit and a malware is that exploit is very anonymous compared to a malware where you can have some like fingerprints and you can, link malwares, let's say, together somehow. Exploits are very anonymous in terms of code. So it makes it hard to say, okay, this code has been made by probably this person or this group, and it's linked to this code because they are very different. So the exploit business model is a little bit different because of that too. I've seen on some criminal firms, some claiming to have a large amount of money in terms of budget to buy exploits. So you find different things like online stores where you find, credit cards or any type of credentials, I would say. You find like Netflix accounts, any sort of drugs and things like that.
I guess I was wondering if there's anything that's really changed, with these underground forums in terms of like what they're selling or how they're operating, or is it still kind of the same as it's always been?
I think the behavior changed a little bit in terms of what they discuss publicly into general forums, because we've seen some forums being taken down. We've seen, criminals being arrested, and they know that usually there's at least a few person into that forum that's either law enforcement or researchers. So they really try to keep the chatting about criminality to a minimum. But on some forums, you still see that when they talk about, oh, I'm selling this toolkit, or I'm selling this malware, I'm selling this service. So you see a lot of chatter about services, for instance. You see less chatter about banking Trojans because they know it's a hot topic and probably law enforcement or researcher would be interested with that. So they kind of try to take the discussions offline, meaning on ICQ, Jabber, or like private messages on forums. Yeah, behavior changed. Like they don't share their email addresses anymore, like openly. They would probably do it on private messages, probably not. They would just give you a Jabber address. So they're trying to be very careful. I've seen also more and more of them using Bitcoin as a currency because it's very anonymous and, they're not going to shut it down anytime soon. So if you remember a few years ago, Liberty Reserve got shut down and, law enforcement got a lot of information out of that takedown. So they're going to switch also to using perfect money, web money, and one of the primary one is Bitcoin. They're also trying to use different email addresses instead of using Gmail or Hotmail or Yahoo. They'll probably use emails that you can only access through the dark web to get even, to stay even more anonymous.
Say you're someone who's not really very technically proficient and you want to use some of these cybercrime as a service to, attack somebody. I guess I'm wondering, is it just kind of low-level DDoS attacks and simple stuff that's available, or would I be able to pull off a sophisticated attack just, if I had some money to spend and hire somebody?
Yeah, sure. You could do either of these, actually. I've recently stumbled on a new, let's say, DDoS botnet. So the first price where you get the web interface to control the infected machine and the piece of malware, you get that for $35. Very cheap, right?
Yeah.
So after that, you can get hosting to host your web interface. You probably get a server for maybe not like a heavy one, probably between $9 and $20, right? And after that, you're pretty much done. The only way you need to find is how to deliver your malware. Then you have also other services where they can you can pay a fee and they will just help you to deliver that malware the way you want it. It could be email, it could be drive-by download, using some exploit kits. Because a lot of tools are also, free and available out there. Now, if you want a banking Trojan, Zeus is out there, so anyone can come and use it. don't even need to buy it. So there's a lot of tools and services that are available for somebody who's not technical to be able to pull it off, because some people will help you in exchange in a small fee and do some of the work for you. Probably average to start something, a couple of $100, depending on the type of piece of malware that you're using and the hosting.
Yeah, and that's pretty much all the questions I have, unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on.
Yeah, I think dark web is also a place that is kind of fascinating for some people. So yeah, because dark web, it's kind of like a secret area kind of thing. But
yeah.
I mean, it's true. There are some corner of the dark web that I don't even go. Like everything that's related to child pornography is there, and then you have the whole regular, let's say, cyber criminality. And this is where you find, those forums and some of the, let's say, like some of these online shops also have two versions of, you have a regular web version and you have a dark web version. Just in case the other one, gets taken down, then you can have the other one as a backup.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we recently find a crypt service. So it's basically a service where you go and have your malware encrypted to evade detection by antiviruses. So they opened the service into the regular web, and they also had a dark web version of it. And some forums also, they have the two versions.
Yeah, well, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And that'll do it for this week's episode. Big thanks to Loucif Kharouni for stopping by and filling us in on the dark web and 0 days. As always, the Cybercrime and Business Podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact to their business, and proactively address threats head-on. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can find more episodes and subscribe on iTunes, YouTube, and all the major podcasting sites. And for more information, check out surfwatchlabs.com.